Imagine walking away from the help you need because someone's story doesn't sound like yours. That's what happens when we buy into the lie of, I can't relate, and it keeps people stuck. I can't relate feels harmless, but it's actually a defense mechanism. It's one of the ways substance use disorder tries to protect itself. Because if you convince yourself that you can't relate, then you don't have to listen. You don't have to look at yourself. You don't have to change. But recovery isn't about relating. It's about healing. So where does this idea come from? The belief that you have to relate comes from the 12-step model, specifically Alcoholics Anonymous. In that setting, people found comfort in sharing their stories. And there's value in that. Peer support can be useful, even powerful. But let's be clear, it's not science-based. It's not a clinical intervention. And in many cases, it's not necessary. Here's what actually makes group treatment powerful. In a professional treatment, whether it's IOP, PHP, or residential, the peer component matters, but not because everyone has the same drug of choice or the same background. The real power is that it puts you in a room with people who stress you, people who trigger you, who push your buttons and make you uncomfortable. In those moments, you learn. You learn what you need to look at. You learn what you need to change, where you need boundaries, and how to handle discomfort without numbing it. That's treatment. That's healing, not just relating. Or to say it bluntly, relatability is not treatment. Let's break down some of those myths. You don't need to have the same drug of choice. You don't need to be in a group of alcoholics if alcohol was your issue. You don't need to have the same job, the same background, or the same trauma story. This is not the Trauma Olympics or the Stress Olympics. Here's the truth. Relatability can feel comfortable, but it's not recovery. Thinking you need to relate is just another excuse from your substance use disorder, a way your addiction tries to keep its old patterns safe. So what actually does matter in treatment? Treatment isn't about comparing your war stories. It's about creating a new life in a healthier story. By the time you come to treatment, your patterns are already set. You know how to drink. You know how to use. You know how to stay stuck. And let me be clear, professional treatment is not the place to spend hours reliving the blow-by-blow details of your drug of choice. That doesn't move you forward. It keeps you rehearsing old wiring, talking endlessly about how you used, how much, how often, or what happened when you were under the influence just strengthens the cycle you're here to break. In fact, it reinforces your drinking or using identity instead of building your recovery one. The work of treatment is going underneath the surface story. It's about exploring feelings and that urge to use. It's about recognizing the patterns of thought and behavior that keep looping. It's about naming the stressors and defenses that fuel relapse. What you need to work on are your feelings, your behaviors, your stressors. You need a plan specific to you that equips you with a toolbox to get through life with a range of emotions you don't have to medicate in destructive ways. Relatability might be one of the tools in the box, but it's not the box itself, because recovery isn't about mastering your drug of choice. It's about mastering your life without it. And so that means building a personalized toolbox, skills for stress, skills for emotional management, ways to handle conflict, strategies for boredom, tools for connection and attachment and joy. The real measure of recovery isn't whether you can out-talk someone else's story and details. It's about whether you can handle life on life's terms without needing to medicate every feeling. So when you walk into treatment, remember, it's not about comparing stories of how bad it got. It's about rewriting the story of where you go from here. And let's talk about the role of professionals. Treatment is not story time. It's skill building time. Your therapist, counselor, or staff doesn't need a history of addiction to be effective. Their job is not to sit in the room and swap stories. Their role is not to be relatable. Their role is to provide science-backed, evidence-based treatment, to hold a safe and consistent space where healing can happen, to guide you towards skills you may never have learned. Skills in emotional regulation, communication, boundary setting, relapse prevention, and stress. In fact, when providers lean too heavily on their own stories, it can actually get in the way. It risks making the focus about them instead of about you. Or it can blur boundaries, leaving you wondering whether the session is about your recovery or about comparison. What actually changes lives is not whether your provider has been there or walked in your exact shoes. What changes lives is their ability to bring in interventions that work. Motivational interviewing, CBT, DBT, trauma-informed care, mindfulness, family systems work. What changes lives is their ability to listen carefully, challenge unhealthy patterns, and equip you with practical strategies. Personal experience can sometimes offer perspective or hope, but it should never be the foundation of treatment. The foundation has to be clinical integrity skill and a commitment to supporting you in building a sustainable recovery. Because in the end, what heals you isn't whether you can relate to your therapist's story. What heals you is whether you can build new tools, new patterns, and new ways of living. So here's the takeaway. Recovery doesn't require you to relate. It requires you to engage, to sit in the room, to be uncomfortable, to face yourself honestly. Relating might help sometimes, but it's not the point. The point is transformation. If you've ever thought, I can't relate, so I can't get better here, challenge that belief, because you don't need to relate to heal. You need to do the work. And that's where freedom lives.